Brothers and sisters, we're ready to begin our first class. Our speaker is Brother Mark O'Grady. The theme for Brother Mark O'Grady's classes this week is Caleb, Giant of Faith. Today's class is entitled A Land Flowing with Milk and Honey. Brother Mark.
Thank you, Brother David, and good morning, brothers and sisters. Well, this morning we look at the largest incident in Caleb's life, the story of the 12 spies. We're actually going to look at the spying incident this morning, and then tomorrow we're going to look at the consequences which flowed in chapter 14 of Numbers. The things we look at today are described in Scripture in the book of Hebrews, chapter 3, verse 8, as being the provocation in the wilderness. This was the pivotal moment. This was the point when God decreed that an entire generation was going to be wasted in the wilderness. And the apostle in Hebrews 3 makes a point very powerfully for you and me when he says, "Today, if ye will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness." So this morning we want to ask ourselves, why was it that God rejected an entire generation in the wilderness? And why was it that Joshua and Caleb entered the land? And as we've already seen, it's going to come down to one very simple thing. They believed that God is able. Now I'd like you to come back with me now to the record in Numbers 13. We're going to be looking extensively at Numbers 13 this morning, but comparing it with a few other passages as well. And when we read the substantive record in Numbers 13, at first blush, it looks as if it was Yahweh who gave the instruction to send out the spies. Verse 1, Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, "Send thou men, that they may search out the land." However, there's actually 5 different passages which describe this incident. And I went through an exercise, and it's quite helpful to do. This is just the first page of many, where you take those 5 incidents and you put them together and work out the parallel and all the details that come from those 5 different occurrences. So we've got Numbers 13. In the second column, we've got Numbers 32 and Deuteronomy 9. In the third column, we've got Deuteronomy 1. Joshua 14. You won't be able to read that, but just to give you a bit of a visual on how we can go through and put all of those records together, because together they form a composite and more detailed picture. Because at the beginning of Deuteronomy, in chapter 1, verse 19 to 46, Moses opens the book by rehearsing what happened on this fateful day. Furthermore, in Numbers 32, when he's so upset with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, he recounts in detail again what happened on this terrible occasion. And then Caleb himself, actually, when he appears before Joshua in Joshua 14, also gives us a record of what happened on this day. And when we piece all those records together, we're actually going to find that this was triggered by the people's response to a very simple instruction from God. So let's paint some background. Well, we know that after the tabernacle had been set up and they'd received the law, they left the area of Sinai and they travelled north through the wilderness towards the promised land. In Deuteronomy 1 verse 19, Moses describes it, "And when we departed from Horeb, we went through all that great and terrible wilderness, which ye saw by the way of the mountain of the Amorites, as Yahweh our God commanded us, and we came to Kadesh Barnea." Kadesh Barnea. Well, in Numbers 13 and verse 26, Kadesh is described as being in the wilderness of Paran. The wilderness of Paran is part of what we would know today as the Negev Desert. It's desolate. It's actually found in the flattish area here, just before you start rising onto the hill country of Judah or the mountains of Israel. That's the area of Hebron, and that's the city of Jerusalem up there as well. So Kadesh Barnea is in this flattish area here before you start rising up onto the mountains. Now, I want you to feel the sense of excitement that's in the air as they camp in the area of Kadesh Barnea, because 400 years of promises are about to burst into fulfillment. This is what God had promised originally to their fathers and had repeated it to them personally. So this is part of the motivation of what encouraged them to leave slavery in Egypt and head to a better future. And so we get a sense of momentum building here, that there's a crescendo of hope and anticipation as they're camping on the borders of the promised land. Now this becomes for them the moment of truth. Brother Thomas just has an interesting little expression actually in Elpis Israel, page 300, when he says, the time, however, had now arrived to put this fourth generation to a final test. So when God promises something, do we believe it? Do we believe he can make the humanly impossible possible? And that's the great test. Do we trust what he says? Now God, in Deuteronomy 9, had actually given them a simple instruction. Deuteronomy 9 verse 23, Yahweh sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land which I have given you. So this incident began with a really straightforward instruction from God. Go up and possess this land. But Israel had a different view. I'd like you to come with me to Deuteronomy chapter 1, where Moses rehearses what happened on that fateful occasion. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 21 for context. Behold, Yahweh thy God has set the land before thee. By the way, this is Moses rehearsing decades later what had taken place on the day of provocation. Behold, Yahweh thy God hath set the land before thee. Go up and possess it, as Yahweh God of thy fathers hath said unto thee. There's the instruction. Fear not, neither be discouraged. And you came near unto me, every one of you, and said, we will send men before us, and they shall search us out the land, and bring us word again by what way we must go up, and into what cities we shall come. Now in verse 23, Moses thought this was a good idea. Verse 23, the saying pleased me well, so I took 12 men of you, one of a tribe. Now from the record in Numbers chapter 13 that we read, it appears he must have taken the instruction to God, and God endorsed it and said, send men up to take the land. So I think if we piece the records together, we get the people coming with the idea. We get Moses thinking that's not a bad suggestion. He goes to God, and God issues a command to take 12 men and send them up, as spies. Now we could be excused for thinking that because God endorsed it, it was unreservedly a wonderful idea. But there's a salutary lesson here, and there's a cautionary tale. If we set our hearts on something that we earnestly desire, regardless of whether it's a good idea or not, sometimes God will give us what we want. It can be a test. It can illustrate the law of consequences, sometimes known as the law of harvest. What a man sows, that he shall reap. And sometimes what we desperately desire is not actually the best thing for us. And there are many examples in Scripture where the people wanted something. God gave them what they asked for, and later the consequences were less than satisfactory. You can probably think of several occurrences, but one was when they said, make us a king. And God gave them Saul. Another occasion is when they said, give us flesh to eat. And God gave them flesh to eat with disastrous consequences. Now what we want to do now is just go back and read verse 22 again, and we're going to read it a little more critically. Verse 22, and ye came near unto me, all, every one of you. There's been some collaboration going on here. They come as a collective. They've discussed what they want to do. And they now send a delegation on behalf of the whole nation. You came, every one of you, and you said, and just note the tone. Look at the pronouns that are used. And in fact, what you're going to find is this is not a request. This is a statement of intent. So let's read it again. You came near unto me, every one of you, and you said, we will send men before us, and they shall search us out the land, and bring us word again by what way we must go up, and into what cities we shall come. Who's missing? God. There is no reference to God. It's as if they're saying, well, I know this is what you've told us to do. You've made the suggestion we should go up and possess the land, and you've promised to give us the land. But we don't have to be completely reliant on his testimony, his analysis. We're not prepared to blindly trust this instruction to go up there. We would prefer to also do our own analysis, thank you very much. Now, God said he'd give us a land flowing with milk and honey. Well, guess what? We're going to send our men, and we're going to check that out. And then, and note this very carefully, our men are going to tell us by what way we should go. We're going to work out our own direction. Thank you very much. Question for us: who was leading them through the wilderness? Who was searching out the way for them to go? Who searched out a resting place for them every day when they travelled? Now, are we exaggerating? Well, listen to the record a few verses later. This is Moses, decades later, reflecting on what took place. And he says, in verse 32, yet in this thing, you did not believe Yahweh your God, who went in the way before you to search you out a place to pitch your tents in fire by night to show you by what way you should go, and in a cloud by day. Who was it that was leading them in the way? Back in Numbers 13, we won't go there just yet, but the phrase to search or to spy out the land, it's one of the key words in those chapters. It's worth colouring in. It comes up some 12 times. It's the Hebrew word tuwr, T-U-W-R. It's a key word. They wanted to send out people to spy out the land. God uses the same word. It's rather a sad reflection. Hundreds of years later, in the book of Ezekiel, when he says, in the day that I lifted up mine hand unto them, to bring them forth of the land of Egypt, into a land that I had spied out for them, same word, flowing with milk and honey, which is the glory of all lands. Who'd searched out this land? Who had done all the work for them? For hundreds of years, God had searched out this land. He'd led them through the wilderness, one day at a time, with the Ark of the Covenant, searching out a resting place for them along the way. We look at that, brothers and sisters, and then we look at ourselves and we ask ourselves the question, what does it take for us to learn to trust where God leads us in life? And when it comes to crunch points in our life, to either times of trouble or crisis or personal decision makings, big decisions we have to make in life, do we automatically turn to God, or do we just inherently, innately rely on ourselves and try and help ourselves? It's the same question on our journey towards the wilderness. Proverbs 3 verse 5, trust in Yahweh with all thine heart, and lean not into thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Proverbs 3 verse 5. Now at this point we should note that the action of sending out the spies was not in itself sinful. There's at least two other occasions where Joshua sends out spies. So if the spies had come back with a different answer or a different spirit, the outcome could have been very different. The issue here was that, as we see from Deuteronomy 1 verse 22, the motivation and the attitude with which Israel wanted to send out the spies was wrong. They didn't trust in God. And unfortunately, that deficiency came rebounding back on them as the men who were selected brought back an unfaithful message. All right, well, let's spend a little bit of time building a picture of who these men were who were actually sent out to the task. Let's go back now to Numbers chapter 13 and find the description of these particular men. Numbers chapter 13. We saw this briefly in our introductory session the other night. No, I think it was yesterday's study, actually. Numbers 13, send out men that they may search out the land of Canaan. Verse 2, of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them. Of every tribe of their fathers, one person for each tribe. So these men were absolutely chosen as representatives of their respective tribes. One man, one tribe. Not surprisingly, they actually became quite an accurate representation of the spirit of the nation as well. Second criteria is they needed each one to be a ruler. The Hebrew word Nasi, N-A-S-I-Y, and it means one lifted up, a ruler, a chief, or a prince. It is the word that's used of the 12 genetic leaders, the tribal leaders, the heads of each of the 12 tribes. But sometimes the word is used of other groups of princes, as it is here. We know that these are not those leaders, the tribal leaders, because these 12 spies are listed by name, and they are not the same men listed as the genealogical heads of the tribes, for example, in Numbers chapter 7. We mentioned the other day that there Nahshon, the son of Amminadab, was the prince or the tribal leader of Judah, where it's Caleb who was a prince here who's chosen as a representative of that tribe. The wider meaning of this word Nasi, or prince, or ruler, or chief, is seen in the incident of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, where we're told that princes of the congregation rose up against Moses. And the record says, Numbers 16 verse 2, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And what that tells us is to be a prince in this sense means you're a person who is respected and known amongst your tribe. The third criteria for these 12 men is described in verse 3. All these men were heads of the children of Israel. It's the word Rosh. So each of them was a leader amongst the thousands of their tribe. So these men, Caleb and his colleagues, they're all very prominent men. They're men of responsibility. They're men of renown. They're actually men who were chosen because they were ideally suited to the task. They're not there simply by accident of birth. They're appointed because of their abilities. Now, when we think about it, they've actually got a very challenging task to do. It's going to be physically demanding. They had to be up to making that sort of a journey. We'll see more about it shortly. But it's also dangerous work. What do you reckon their chances of survival would have been if they'd been outed as spies for Israel? Just think of the nation of Jericho, the city of Jericho, sometime later, and how they were on the lookout for spies of Israel. What would these men's life have been worth if they had been suspected or caught? Now remember, of course, that all of Israel has been involved in this proposal, every one of you. So you can imagine a bit of a buzz in the camp of Israel that night as Moses confers with the council and they identify who these 12 men should be. Can you imagine the news trickling out to the various families in the tribes of Israel? You know, I can picture them sitting around their campfire at night in the tents of Zebulun. Did you hear? They've actually chosen Gadiel, the son of Sodi. He's a good man, isn't he? That's a good choice. Or in the tribe of Judah, aha, they've chosen Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. I always liked Caleb. He's a good, keen man. Despite being a Gentile, we can trust him. I mean, these men were known, and they were appointed publicly to lead this mission. Can you imagine everybody watching as these men left their tents and gathered together in front of Moses before the congregation, before the tabernacle, to receive their engagement orders? You know, this is a highly significant moment for Israel. And they're going to critically depend upon these men to faithfully fulfill their duty, because the welfare of God's people are going to depend significantly upon how these men complete their duties and tasks. Although they did not realize it, the future destiny of the nation rode upon their shoulders. And it's at this point in verse 16 we have a fascinating little comment just tucked into the record. These are the names of the men which Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Oshea the son of Nun, Joshua. Why is that recorded here? You know, this young man has already been called Joshua many times in the narrative. We find that in Exodus 17, Exodus 24, Exodus 32, Exodus 33, Numbers 11, verse 28. So why is the change specifically recorded here in Numbers chapter 13? Well, let's think about the meaning of the changed name. Oshea means salvation. What does Yah-Oshea mean? Yahweh is salvation. Can you see the point that's being made to them? If only they had heard the point that's being made there, tucked in at the end of verse 16. Yahweh is going to be your salvation, not you. Before he sends them out, Moses gives detailed instructions on what they were to do. We read them in verses 17 to 20. Just note that the word south here is the Hebrew word Negev. So I've got it here from the Jerusalem Bible. Go up into the Negev, then go up into the highlands. See what sort of country it is and what sort of people the inhabitants are, whether they're strong or weak, few or many. What sort of country they live in, whether it be good or poor. What sort of towns they have, whether they're open or fortified. What sort of land it is, fertile or barren, wooded or open. Be bold. Bring back some of the produce of the land. It was the season for early grapes. Now, a large part of Moses' instruction relates to the quality of the land. The word eretz for land occurs 5 times here in these 4 verses. Just note that carefully, because that contrasts with the report that the 12 spies brought back, which focused particularly on the people and the cities. In verse 20, when Moses says, "And be ye of good courage," chazak, it literally means to be strong. Now, we're familiar with this expression. You know that comment that's made to Joshua, be strong and of good courage? It's actually the phrase, be strong. So the statement here is, be strong, is Moses' encouragement. So he sends them off. Now, bear in mind that the expectations of the people here and of the spies have already been built very high. Their expectation is that they were going to go to a land of extraordinary fruitfulness. The whole congregation had been highly motivated by that wonderful expression, a land that flows with milk and honey. It's a very powerful, it's a very evocative statement, isn't it? A land that flows with milk and honey. It's an expression that comes up some 20 times in the divine record. It's a superlative statement of the richness and abundance of the good land that God was going to give them. We won't turn it up, but we first come across the expression in Exodus chapter 3, verse 8. And the context there is that God would deliver them from Egypt and bring them into a good land flowing with milk and honey. It next comes up in the 17th verse of the same chapter, Exodus 3, and again with the context of being brought out of affliction and given a land flowing with milk and honey. You know, if we stop and think about it, it's a bit of a strange expression, a land that flows with milk and honey. It can't literally be true. The word flowing means to flow, to gush, or to discharge. The Theological Word Book says the basic idea is a movement of liquid flowing from one location to another. So the land itself isn't literally going to be oozing milk and oozing honey. So it's a metaphor. It's a very graphic way of signifying great abundance and inexhaustible supply. So then think about the symbol of milk. What does that convey? Nurturing, nourishment of the young by a mother. What about honey? In Scripture, sweetness and energizing. Now, by this stage in their journey, God's already used this expression 5 times. So it becomes a very well-known symbol, and Israel is aspiring to have a land flowing with milk and honey. In fact, later on, not much later, in that awful story of Dathan and Abiram, those evil men, they twist and they misuse this expression in a very bitter and poisonous way. And they say to Moses, "You dragged us out of a land flowing with milk and honey, Egypt, and you haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey." And they use God's own promise to stab at Moses. They cast it back in his teeth. But having heard this expression on many occasions, you can imagine anticipation has been raised by the people as these men are dismissed to begin their reconnaissance journey into the land. Now, in your mind, I'd like you to picture these men as they are dismissed by Moses and they're sent off across the valley floor and begin to ascend into the mountains of Judah, the hill country of the Amorites on the horizon. Can you picture this resolute band? 12 men specially chosen for the task, fixed and determined. You can see a gleam in their eye, can't you? You can see the firm step as they head off with the best wishes of the people who wait with eager anticipation for their return. There's a sense of purpose. There's a sense of resolve, of responsibility. They're engaged in a meaningful mission. Off they head, the grand reconnoitering before the long-promised entry. 41 days later, 10 of those men are dead. What went wrong? Well, let's travel with them on the journey. The journey's a big one. In verse 21, it says, "So they went up and they searched the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob as men come to Hamath." The wilderness of Zin was probably at the tip of the wilderness of Paran. It incorporates the area of Kadesh Barnea. Hamath was one of the oldest fortified cities in Syria. It's actually a long way north into Syria itself. And Rehob sat on the road to it, probably near the northern Hula Valley, just south of the slopes of Mount Hermon. That's a big journey on foot. From Kadesh Barnea, it's about 250 kilometres as the crow flies. To drive it today is about 370 kilometres. These men did that return journey in 40 days. That means they averaged between 15 to 20 kilometres per day. They would have had to cross mountain ranges. They would have had to traverse valleys. They would have had to ford rivers. They would have had to penetrate deep forests. Now let's read through verse 21 to 24. They went up, they searched the land. Verse 22, "And they ascended by the south, they came unto Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were." Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. "And they came unto the brook of Eshcol, and cut down from thence a branch, with one cluster of grapes, and they bare it between two upon a staff, and they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. The place was called the brook Eshcol, a cluster of grapes, because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence." Now, do you notice something odd about that description? You know, on that journey, they would have seen some amazing sights. Just think about it. They would have seen the pristine waters of Lake Galilee. They would have seen the rugged Judean mountains. They would have experienced the fertile valleys of the Jezreel, the rolling hills of the Shephelah, the rugged mountain peaks of the Carmel Range, the ridgeline, and the abruptness of Mount Tabor. But look at those verses and see what's actually being described. It's all about Hebron and Eshcol. Just two places. Eshcol is just outside Hebron. You know, of all the places they could have talked about, the divine record focuses on just the first major city as they ascended into the hill country of the Amorites and the fruitfulness of that particular region. So let's look at both of those two areas in turn, because they prescribe the parameters of the report which the 12 spies brought back. So first of all, the city of Hebron. Now, it's this city in particular that catches their attention. It's this city that dealt such a devastating blow to their faith. Now, we're going to look at it, God willing, in more detail at a later study in Joshua chapter 14 and 15. Suffice it to say, at the moment, in that city, there were giants. In the record here, we have 3 men named as being the children of Anak. Now, the Anakim were the giants who lived in the land of Canaan in those days. They're obviously fierce warriors, and I can imagine how terrifying they would have been to behold. Now, the other location that's highlighted is the brook, Eshcol, a cluster of grapes, as it means. The word brook, it's the Hebrew word nahal, and it means a brook, a valley, or a wadi. Today, no one's precisely certain of where Eshcol was located. Some commentators say it's just slightly to the north of Hebron, and then the other half say, oh, it's a valley just slightly to the south of Hebron. Either way, it's associated with the area of Hebron, and we get that for 2 reasons. One is its linkage here in the record, and the other is through the use of the name Eshcol, because Eshcol just happens to be the name also of one of the 3 men that Abraham was confederate with, who came from the area of Hebron or Mamre. This is before the Battle of the Kings in Genesis chapter 14. Now, in Eshcol, they cut down this spectacular cluster of grapes, most likely as they returned. It's so large, it's got to be carried on a pole between 2 men. As we read through the flow of the narrative, it would imply that the figs and pomegranates were gathered also from the same location. Now, at this point, there's a little comment which was tucked into the narrative. You know how we find all the time that no words in Scripture are wasted. Everything's there for a purpose. And there's a little expression popped into the narrative in verse 20 when they were dismissed. Now be ye of good courage, bring of the fruit of the land. Now, the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. Why are we told this? We don't have time to go into it in great significance, but let's just notice 3 things. First of all, the first ripe grapes. This is the beginning of harvest. This means the point at which those men went through the land, everywhere they looked, they saw a land which was bursting with fruitfulness, all ready to be plucked. The whole land was full of harvest, all ready for the children of Israel when they came into the land, sitting there ripe for the taking. And then look at this. I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe of the fig tree at her first time. Hosea 9 verse 10. Or Jeremiah 2 verse 23. Thus saith Yahweh, I remember thee, the kindness of thy youth, the love of thine espouses, when thou wentest after me in the wilderness. In a land that was not sown, Israel was holiness unto Yahweh, and the first fruits of his increase. All that devour him shall offend. It's a picture of what God wanted with them, what he wanted them to be, but they didn't see the message. Right, well, armed with these amazing fruits, they returned to the camp after searching out the land for 40 days. We pick up the record and we get the picture very clearly in verse 26. I'm going to read it, see if you can pick out what's repeated. And they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. You notice the emphasis, the double emphasis on all the congregation? It's mentioned twice. It's making the point that when they came and gave their report back, everybody came flocking around. Well, you can imagine the excitement. Everybody's going about their daily business in the camp, and the cry goes up, hey, the spies are coming back. Can you imagine everybody dropping everything and rushing helter-skelter towards the tabernacle? They're desperately interested to hear what these men have got to say. And they report back with their story in front of Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people who gather around. Can you imagine them eager to hear the story, wowed and amazed by what they see these spies are carrying? I mean, just imagine. Can you imagine the impact of seeing 2 men carrying such a huge cluster of grapes? You know, the supermarket in the wilderness hadn't stocked grapes for a very long time. I suspect clusters of grapes would have been in quite short supply in their wilderness wanderings. And can you see these people, men, women and children, all pressing forward, eager to see and to hear? It meant that they had front row seats for what now transpires. Verse 27, and they told him, and they said, we came unto the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. And they lay it out before the amazed gaze of the congregation. Figs, pomegranates, grapes like you wouldn't even imagine. Stop! Stop! That's it, that's it. That's all you need to say. Don't say any more. Just stop right there. That's exactly what God had promised. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the fruitfulness. If only they had stopped there and said, it's just like God said. But they didn't stop there. Verse 28. Nevertheless. But. However. You know, brothers and sisters, when God speaks, there is no nevertheless. If God promises something, it's absolute. It's immutable. It will take place. There is no but, if, or maybe. What God promises, he will deliver. The land is flowing with milk and honey exactly as he had promised. Verse 28. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities were walled and very great. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. So they talk about the people being so strong. They talk about the cities being walled and very great. And you can imagine that being hard to conquer. But that's not all. You can imagine them pausing for effect. The people hanging on every word. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. There's giants in that land. Oh, and by the way, you know something else? Something that struck us as we walked through the land? We got there and we found there was already somebody else living in our land. Just look at how verse 29 reads. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. Oh, the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites, they were dwelling in the mountains. Oh, the Canaanites were dwelling by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. Wherever we looked in the country, we found there were already people there. Fools. What do they expect? Vacant possession? I mean, God had said to them in Deuteronomy 9 verse 23, go up and possess the land. It's the word yarash, to seize or take possession of. But as they start to list all of these obstacles, they don't reflect on what God had said he would do. Now, these words start to have a profound impact on the people who are there. Watch the reaction. See it in their eyes. Watch it play out across their faces as they start to visualize what these men have put into words. And now everything is just teetering on the brink. Their confidence in what God has promised is starting to waver, to totter, before this description of great fenced cities and strong people. And in a few short sentences, their faith begins to quail. Numbers 32 verse 9 says they discouraged the hearts of the people. It means to make them of none effect, to hinder or to restrain them. And quick as a flash, Caleb spots what's happening. He can see it all. It's interesting that Caleb comes to the fore here and not Joshua. It appears from the record that Caleb is probably the older man. Joshua is described in the record as being a young man at this stage. We know from the record that Caleb's about age 40. Certainly, as we'll see tomorrow, they stand shoulder to shoulder in chapter 14. But here it's Caleb who shows qualities of outstanding leadership, because he senses the spectre of fear rising in the people. He can sense the danger, and he sees the effect of these negative words, and then he hears as the people begin to react, because it becomes audible. First a ripple, then a wave, a murmur of dismay begins to wash over the people. A sound of discontentment begins to swell, and quick as a flash he leaps into the breach. He can still turn it round. The people are teetering here. If I leap in with positive words, I might be able to save the day here. All we need is some reassurance, some positivity. Enthusiasm and positivity can be catchy. With God on our side, we can overcome. In verse 29, it says, He stills the people. They were audible. It means to silence them, to hush, to hold the tongue. And then he exhorts them in verse 29, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. Now, in the English, we don't get the intensity of those words. The phrase to go up, it's a Hebrew word we're familiar with. It's the word alah, to ascend. But it's repeated. And the second time, it's repeated with the infinitive, which is like a mood. The phrase to overcome, it's the Hebrew word yakol. It means to prevail, to overcome, to be able. It too is repeated, and the second time with the infinitive. Literally, go up, to possess it. We can overcome, we can overcome. And the translators have tried to pick that up by saying, let's go up at once. We are well able to overcome it. When Caleb says, let's possess it, it's in the perfect tense. It's actually an accomplished fact. Young's Literal says, let us certainly go up, for we have possessed it, for we are thoroughly able. Let's move, says Caleb. Let's go immediately. It's a done deal. God's promised it to us. We already possess it. It's already ours. So he's urging the people, and everything is hanging in the balance. Will his words have the impact they need on the listeners? Will they carry the day? And he sits there, and it's all just swinging. Will the pendulum pause, hesitate, and swing back in the other direction? And then his hopes are cruelly dashed. It all comes crashing down. Because the wretched men, those faithless spies, they double down on their story. And they then start to justify themselves by heaping slander on the land. You know, Scripture gives us such a fascinating insight into human behaviour, doesn't it? We don't always possess balanced wisdom. Sometimes our brethren in conversations set us a better example. When they do, how do we respond? When somebody says something that implies that actually we may not be perfectly correct in our assessment, or they point out something that we've omitted to see, or they act in a more faithful way that shows us up, at that crucial point, how does our heart respond and what do we say? You know, this is the moment of truth for the spies. They could have said, oops, yeah, actually Caleb's right. And they could have responded and rallied in behind this faithful man and said, yeah, actually Caleb's right. Yeah, with God on our side, we can. No, they double down. That's the flesh. And you spot it with the intensity of the language which now gets used. Immoderate speech always indicates a problem. So in phase 2, they immediately respond to Caleb by outright and blatantly opposing him, and they give a bad analysis. Verse 31, the men that went up said, we are not able to go up against the people, they're stronger than us. Oh, that's now absolute. This is impossible. It cannot be done. This isn't sowing doubt. Now this is emphatic. Where's the Spirit of our Lord? Mark 9 verse 23, Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. Now these spies take things in a disastrous direction because of their own feelings, because they don't stop there. Verse 32 says, they brought up an evil report of the land. The word evil report, we're going to look at it again tomorrow. Debar, it means a slander, a defamation, a whispering. So this happens now more in private. In verse 32 it says they brought up a slander of God's land. This land is God's, and they slander what God is going to give them. And I'm just going to run through what they actually say. Verse 32, and listen to the exaggeration. The land eats up the inhabitants thereof. Verse 32, all the men we saw were of great stature. Really? Every single person you saw? Verse 33, we felt like we were grasshoppers compared to the giants. Verse 33, they thought we were only grasshoppers as well. Shagab, the locust, like little insects to be crushed. Deuteronomy 1 verse 28 tells us, they said, oh, those cities, they're walled up to heaven. Can you hear the exaggeration? These are faithless men who are doubling down to justify their position. And their words have a terrible impact. The damage is done, an irreversible, irretrievable mess. And those words led to a generation dying in the wilderness. And it's all caused by the words of self-justifying men who didn't have the faith to follow Caleb's lead and believe in God. So at this point, it leads us to ask ourselves personally, what impact do I have on my brothers and sisters and those around me? And it's a question for every one of us to ask ourselves. Obviously, all of us have an influence on those we associate with. Every word we speak has an impact on other people. Do we encourage our brothers and sisters to be strong? In our general conversations, do we encourage them to go and take of the fruits of the land? Are we known to be supportive and positive in ecclesial life? Or do we discourage the hearts and minds of our brothers and sisters by our behaviour or by our words? In private, do we say positive things about other people or about the ecclesia? Or do we, behind closed doors, slander, to complain about the ecclesia, the brethren in it, behind people's backs, those poisonous little comments which are designed to do so much damage? Let's review every conversation we've had in the last 2 weeks with our brothers and sisters, with our spouses, with our children, with our friends, in the privacy of our homes. Have they been positive, encouraging words, or have we sapped the strength of our brethren? Let's finish with a proverb. I'll read from the ESV, Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 25. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. So brothers and sisters, are we known in ecclesial life